Hey guys, I'm Kevin. In today's lesson, we are going to learn about chord extensions, what they are, how to create them, and how to apply them. So get tuned up and let's dive in. What is a chord extension? So simply, a chord extension is when you add a note to a triad or a four-note chord. So you've probably come across this on chord charts where you see C9 or C11 or C13 or C minor 7 flat 5. There's a whole bunch of numericals that get added to chords. So those actually are just notes that add a little bit of color to an already basic chord, like a C major chord or a C7 chord. In today's video, we're going to really dive into the C7 chord and turning that into a 9 chord. So we're going to look at the C7 chord in all of its inversions and take that and extend that chord out by adding a note to it, and let's get into that right now. So the chord that we're going to focus on today is the 9 chord, and the 9 chord is built off of the dominant 7th chord, which would just be written as C7 if you were to see it. But the actual formula for a 9 chord is root, 3rd, 5th, flat 7, and 9. So in our basic C7 chord, if we look at just our root position C7 chord here, we have 4 notes. We have 4 strings, and we only have 1 fretted here. So we play our open strings, so we know that the notes of this chord are G, C, E, and then the first fret of the A string is our B flat note. And that's our flat 7. So that's what makes this into a flat 7 chord or a dominant 7th chord, C7. The other notes we know G is the 5th, C is the root, and E is the 3rd. And you can map that out using the major scale, and we'll get back into that in a little bit here. But the main take here is a 7th chord is made up of root, 3rd, 5th, and flat 7th, and then to make that into a 9 chord, you just simply add the 9. So let's take a look now at C7 in all 4 of its inversions. So we have our C7 here in root position. We also have C7 here in first inversion, where our notes change, where we have the flat 7 on top, the 3rd, the 5th, and the root is now down here, because the root of our C chord is C, and if we look at our A string, we have A, B, C. So that's the root. And that's something else to mention here too, is that chord inversions are basically just taking the same chord and moving the root to a different string so you can use a different shape to achieve the same chord. So we have C7 in root position, first inversion, and now we move up here to second inversion, where we have the root on the G string, the 5th on the C string, the flat 7th on the E string, and the 3rd on the A string. So that's something also that I would encourage you to do. When you're playing your chords, go through them and really think about what notes you're actually playing in your chords, whether it's just a major chord or a 7th chord. I feel like you'll learn a lot just by doing that. So this is our second inversion, and then our third and final inversion here is played up here, where we have our 3rd on the top, our flat 7 on the C string, our root, key component here, on the E string, and our 5th is on the A string. So I would practice going through your inversions here. Before we add the 9 chord. So now we're going to take a look at the major scale so we can learn how to convert these dominant 7th chords into 9 chords. So let's revisit our major scale in the key of C. The C major scale starts with an open C note here on the C string, and then we go to the D note, which is the 2nd fret of the C string. We have our open E, F on the 1st fret, G on the 3rd fret, our open A string, B on the 2nd fret, and then we return to our octave of C here on the 3rd fret of the A string. So the C major scale, because we're talking about C7 chords, those are the only notes that we're worried about here. So whenever you're talking about a chord or an extension, you're only worried about the notes within that actual key, which is just C. So it's basically do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Well, to construct a 9 chord, we only have 8 notes in the major scale. We actually only have 7 notes in the major scale. So how do we get a 9 out of that? Well, the 9 is actually just the equivalent of the 2nd note of the scale. So the 9 is just meaning the 2nd note above the octave. So in this case, in the key of C, our 2nd note in the major scale, do, re, is a D note. So any time that we're trying to take a C7 chord and turn it into a 9 chord, we need to add that D note to the chord to make it into a 9 chord. If you're digging the sound of my uke, head over to allforuke.com/shop. You can have a Kala ukulele for yourself. When you buy your Kala ukulele through AllForUke, you're supporting us, and we really appreciate it. Make sure you check it out. Concerts, sopranos, tenors, baritones, a wide selection of accessories, capos, and more. All for you, allforuke.com/shop. All right, so now that we know we need to add the 9th to the chord, or the 2nd, we need to find a D note in the closest proximity that we can to the chord. So let's start off here with our root position C7 chord. So we know this is our position here, and we have the notes G, C, E, and B flat. Well, we have a problem. We only have 4 strings on a uke, but this chord requires 5 notes. So what we do is we have to omit something from the chord. So in this case, we want to omit the note that's the closest, which is going to be the root. So instead of using the C note here on our open string for the C7 chord, we're going to go and add the D note, which we learned in our major scale, which is on the 2nd fret of the C string. So now we add our middle finger to the 2nd fret of the C string, and we now have turned this C7 chord into a C9 chord. So listen to the difference here in root position. Here is C7, and here is C9. So you're probably asking yourself, well, how is this still a C chord if it doesn't have the C root anymore? Well, the root is now just going to have to be implied, and that would be played by a bass player or somebody playing that C note underneath it, because now we are just playing the top of this C chord. So we have C7 to C9. And the cool thing is this works for each of the other inversions. So now let's go up to our first inversion of C7. So in this chord, again, we need to find our root note. And the root note of this inversion is on the A string right here, which is our C note. So to make this into a 9 chord, we need to find the D note, which is the 9th. And we keep everything else the same. All we do here is go C, C sharp, D. It's our closest note to get to D. And we now have our C9 chord. It's very important that you call this C9 or C dominant 9 rather than C major 9, because that's a very different thing. It's a very different video. But this is a C9 chord here. So take a listen here to C9 and C7. Very cool when you can just add that note and bring a little color to that chord. So there's our first inversion. Now let's move up here to 2nd inversion of C7. So again, we need to identify the root in this chord, which I know the root of this chord here is on the G string of the 5th fret, because we have G, A, B, C. So we're looking for that root note. And now we need to find the D note, which is going to be a whole step above that. So we just jump up 2 frets here to the 7th fret, and now we keep that same shape otherwise, and we have this, which I'm using middle, ring, index, pinky. It's quite a squeeze to get this 9 chord, especially as you travel up the fretboard. But very cool. So the way you want to practice that is move from your 7th chord to your 9th chord and listen to that color addition. And then our final inversion here, 3rd inversion, we want to identify the root once again. And I know now that the root is on my E string because we have E, F, G, A, B, C. So again, I'm going to go up a whole step or 2 frets from there to find my D note. And lo and behold, we have this shape here, which I'm using my middle finger and my ring finger to bar the bottom 3 strings. And that's how I create my 9 chord. So again, quick review here. We have our C7, root, C9, C7, C9, C7, C9, and C7, C9. Get really good at practicing those. I promise it's going to add a lot to your palette. So now let's talk about where you would apply these chord extensions. Well, the main use of this chord C9 is to be substituted as a 5 chord. Now the 5 chord in any key has a very big instability in it, so it really wants to resolve. So this 9 chord actually functions the same way, it just kind of gives it a little bit more color. So anytime you're playing a C7 chord and it's functioning as the 5th chord in the key, that 5th chord wants to resolve to home, which is the root. So in the case of C, we're talking about F being the root, because in the key of F, we have F, G minor, A minor, B flat, and C would be the 5th. So we have to resolve that C7 chord to an F major chord. So take a listen going from C7 to F. It's a very final landing. That's a big, strong resolution. So again, C7 to F. Now let's do that with a 9 chord and take a listen to what that sounds like. So the 9 chord can be used to substitute for the 5th chord. You could also use it to substitute for the 1 chord. You could add it just about to anything as a dominant 7th chord goes, just to add some color. And you don't necessarily have to play that chord the entire time. You could be playing something with C7 and just kind of add the 9 chord freely when you want to add a little color here and there. So we talked a lot about 9th chords today and how to use them, what they are, and I really think that it's going to add a lot to your palette if you can extend these beyond your 7th chord. So I put a PDF together on the website that I'll give you guys for free. You can check it out, learn more about chord extensions. I also will leave a link in the description to my video that is solely focused on chord inversions. And I encourage you guys, leave your comments, leave your questions below. I love hearing from you guys. Let me know where you're playing your uke. My name's Kevin. Thank you so much. I'll see you next time.
Meet me down by the seaside. We can howl at the moon rise. Watch as the tide strolls in.